Hey, Steve DiMaggio here, and today we're going to start a series on cymbals. We will go over what cymbals are made from, how they are made, and lastly, how to choose the right instrument for the job. For the most part, we'll be discussing what you find on a traditional drum set, which are hi-hat cymbals, ride cymbals, crash cymbals, and also effect cymbals. Now, hi-hat cymbals are used to keep time along with the ride cymbal, while crashes and effect cymbals are usually used to create an accent. Effect cymbals include splashes, pangs, trashes, and chinas, to name a few. Now, we will not be covering orchestral cymbals, but the rules and the concepts we're talking about also apply to those instruments. Now, before we get into the construction of cymbals, let's talk about a couple terms that you'll need to know. Sheet versus cast. Sheet refers to a rolled piece of metal that's laid out and stamped, while cast refers to a molten alloy that's poured into a disc. Now, alloys is a combination of metals used to create a cymbal. Bronze is used interchangeably, sometimes incorrectly here. Hammering is a bit self-explanatory, however, the devil is in the details with hammering, so we'll get a little bit more into that later. Now, lathing is a removing of weight and shaping of a cymbal using a cutting tool while the cymbal spins. Decay. Now, decay is how long it takes a cymbal kind of to wash away into the music. So when you hit it, how long it takes to decay. All right, now let's get into how these instruments are actually made. So first up, cymbal alloys. Most cymbals are made using either a B8 or B20 alloy. Now, again, alloys are a combination of metals, and when we're talking about cymbals, tin and copper are really the main players here. Now, the numbers B8 and B20 stand for the amount of tin content in each alloy. Now, B8 alloy is used in entry-level cymbals, and for the most part are going to sound a little bit more tinny than a B20, despite having less tin in it than a B20 alloy. While B8 is used normally in lower-price entry cymbals like the Sabian B8 line, there are exceptions. The Paiste 2002 line is a B8 alloy and is cherished for its cutting tones. B8 alloy is considered the least complex of all alloys, and normally when you have a B8 cymbal, it's a sheet cymbal. Most beginner drummers will end up with a B8 sheet cymbal set, and the reason is the pricing is a little bit lower on those. Now, B20 alloy is the most common alloy used in professional cymbals. This alloy has 20% tin and generally are much warmer than B8 cymbals. These are the cymbals that young players always aspire to have when they grow up, when they get into bigger bands and kind of dream about being rock stars. Now, there are some other alloys out there. An example would be the Zildjian S series, which is a B12 alloy. So these rules aren't hard and fast as far as the alloys are concerned, but it is a good general guide. Sheet B8 cymbals are going to be more geared towards beginners. B20 cast cymbals are going to be more for professionals and people choosing what sound they want. Now, alloys are only one part of the puzzle when it comes to the cymbal making process. Next, let's talk about the actual manufacturing of the cymbals. So, next up is sheet cymbals versus cast cymbals. Like alloy choice, sheet versus cast is largely a choice between entry level and pro, with some caveats. First, let's dig into a sheet cymbal and how it's constructed. Sheet cymbals are unrolled and stand from a single piece of metal. Usually this technique is used in entry-level B8 cymbals like we previously discussed. Now, cast cymbals are what most buyers will be looking for. This technique involves taking a molten metal and pouring it directly into a mold or a disc, and from there it's flattened out into the cymbal shape. Now let's dig into the actual process of spreading that disc out using hammering and lathing. The hammering and lathing process is really where cymbals become kind of who they are. While sheet cymbals already have their shape right off the bat, cast cymbals are thick discs and need to be hammered into their rough shape. At this point, the belt also will be pressed into the disc. Now, the hammering process can either be done by hand or machine. In the case of Dream cymbals, all our cymbals are hand hammered using either machines or an actual hand hammer. The technique of machine hammering is an automated process, while hand hammering requires a cymbalsmith to place a strike on each cymbal individually. Larger manufacturers like Sabian and Zildjian will use machines in combination with hand hammering depending on the desired outcome. Now, hammering can take place before and after the lathing process, and sometimes even both depending on what sound you want that cymbal to have. Along with creating the shape of the cymbal, the hammering also starts to introduce the sound characteristics of the cymbal. So sound waves are trying to flow through the cymbal, they hit that hammered part and they break up essentially. An example of a heavily hammered complex ride would be the Sweetwater exclusive Dream Bliss ride. It's a very complex, over-hammered, thin cymbal, and when you hit it, there's a whole lot of stuff happening. Now, once the cymbal has been hammered into its rough shape, that's when the cymbalsmith will get into lathing. Lathing does a number of things. It will create the bow of the cymbal, it will remove some weight from the cymbal, and generally speaking, the lighter the cymbal will be, the more warm and less definition it will have. A good example of a thinner, lighter cymbal is that Dream 24-inch Bliss cymbal, which is very thin and very warm, while we can juxtapose that against the Dream Moon Ride that we're going to play in a little bit. That is a thicker cymbal that's been hammered and completely unlathed, and that is very dry, very defined, and has a higher fundamental pitch. Now, lathing also creates the bow from the bell to the edge of the cymbal, and what that does is that helps with stick definition and the time it takes for the cymbal to decay. For example, crash cymbals with a taper down to a thinner edge will decay faster. Now, I also want to mention that lathing produces different width grooves. Now, those grooves in the top of the cymbal allow the sound to radiate out. So the thicker the groove, essentially the longer time those frequencies have to form, normally the lower tone your cymbal will have. Now, after the lathing process, some manufacturers will even re-hammer and refire their cymbals depending on what they want them to sound like. Now, dark matter cymbals, as an example, will be refired and re-hammered after that initial process. Now let's move on to finishing a cymbal up and letting it rest. Now at this point, the cymbal basically has taken its shape, but there's some other things that the cymbal smith needs to do to really fine-tune the sound. Now, one of those things is the finish. Now, in some cases, you'll find a sort of matte sheen finish on cymbals like Zildjian, Dream Bliss. Anything that doesn't have the word brilliant in it has that kind of traditional sheen to it. Now, those traditionally finished cymbals are going to give you a very predictable, moderate kind of rock sound to them normally. So they're not too bright, they're not too dark. In those cases with a traditional cymbal, you'll want to look a little bit more at the lathing, the hammering, the bell, the taper of the cymbal to really figure out how it's going to sound if you haven't heard it before. Now, cymbals can be buffed to a high gloss like you'll find with the Zildjian A custom line. Now, these cymbals are known to be super cutting, super loud. I used to play the projection crashes and they get in and out of music really fast, so it's very good for something aggressive. So generally speaking, those brilliant cymbals are going to sound shinier, they're going to sound brighter, and they're going to cut more. Now, some cymbals are left unfinished and raw, and sometimes only parts of the cymbal are left unfinished and raw. And what those finishes lend themselves to normally is a more dry, articulate sound. So a lot of the times, like in the example of a Dream Eclipse cymbal, you'll have a traditional finish on the outside, and in the center where the bell is, that will actually be an unhammered, unlathed, raw bell. And again, that's great for the stick definition, that's great to cut. Now, after the cymbals are completely done, their badges have been screen printed on, they're ready to go, cymbals need to sit for a little bit of time. There's a lot of molecular things happening that, quite frankly, I don't understand, but it basically needs to calm down. And this will mellow out the instrument. Think about guitars and how you have to let wood rest. Same type of thing with cymbals, because they will evolve over time. So again, the process never really ends with cymbals. They're always evolving, but this last rest period where the cymbal's allowed to mellow down is a very important step. Now, let's get to some actual playing. I'll tell you what I have set up on the kit here. So the first cymbal you're going to hear is a 24-inch contact ride. Now, this ride has wide lathing grooves, it's a thicker cymbal, it's great for rock with a pronounced bell and has a clear musical tone. Other cymbals that would compare great to this Dream Contact ride is any kind of Zildjian traditional A ride, so that's more of your 70s, 80s, 90s kind of rock tone. The second cymbal is a 20-inch Dark Matter Moon ride. Now, this cymbal is unlathed, thick, and heavily hammered. So what you're going to find is it's going to be very dry, very defined, and almost no wash, kind of gongy sounding if you hit it with the shoulder of the stick. Now, the third cymbal is a ride from Dream called the Gorilla Ride. Now, I chose this cymbal because it's very heavy in weight, has thinner lathing grooves, but also has some hammering that happens after the fact. It's a very complex pingy rock cymbal that compares nicely to like a 70s Ping ride or a Sabian Paragon ride. It's a little bit drier than that. I find this cymbal is great to use almost in any studio session that's not looking for a particular tone. And then the last ride we have is that 24-inch Bliss crash ride that we've been talking about. Now, this cymbal has very thin lathing grooves, has been hammered very, very thin, does not have a pronounced bell, and has a very, very gentle bow to it. Again, this cymbal is very thin, has a very nice wash to it and low fundamental tone. Very little attack to this cymbal. So I'm going to play these ride cymbals through because I believe that those are the best ways to hear the differences between all these different types of cymbal processes. So you can hear that with these cymbals, there's some very large differences and then there's some very smaller differences. Where the moon ride is very defined, that thin bliss ride is not defined and washes away, while you have that gorilla and contact ride kind of sitting in the middle. Again, I'm Steve DiMaggio and thanks for watching.